Dr. Carter, you spoke with us in your lecture about centering our work of belonging on the guest as opposed to on the host. Can you share a bit more about that approach and why that matters?
Sure. Yeah, I think all throughout our society, and including in the church and in our youth program, and I think we have built programs and built systems and built communities that left certain people out, and often that was the case for young people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so, in this effort, as we've moved through this sort of progression of trying to find ways of widening that welcome and inviting people back into community who we long ago said explicitly or implicitly, you don't belong. It's required us to think about now, how do we begin to move in different ways so that people can rejoin from the peripheries back into the center of community. And yet those communities that we built have been built with often very solid materials that lock in ways of doing things that are hard to change. And so we have faith communities now that are very, very welcoming for the people who are already there, but don't really feel that way to people who've long ago been excluded and are being brought back into community. So I share that because it's not simply a matter of saying, come back, welcome, we'd love to have you here. There's structures in place and ways of gathering and expectations that have become so solidified that they have to be broken for people with varied abilities to truly be part of those communities. So it's not uncommon for a church, when kind of broached about this invitation to think about how to be more inclusive of people with disabilities, to say, we'd be glad to do that. We're already a welcoming place. We want to be about that work, and we can't wait for people to arrive, not recognizing that people may arrive if they can get through the door or get into the building, but they're unlikely to come back if, when they get there, they discover that really still the programs and the postures don't really have them in mind. So the invitation often for churches is to think about not what's welcoming for us and what for the people who are already there, but who's that guest who's not yet come, and the stranger to our community, and how can we think about the things that would be make this experience accessible and welcoming for them. That's hard because it requires a different lens on our community. And so we often, those are our spots we can't see. And so we often need help seeing the community from that vantage point. That's why we encourage churches often to invite people with disabilities and their families to share their perspectives on that very question of what would it look like to make our community the most welcoming place in this town.
Yeah.
There are wonderful experts and organizations surrounding every church, disability organizations, who would often be very excited to say, here's some things you might not be noticing. Here's some ways you can think about your space and where you gather and the curriculum you use and how that's adapted, or the ways you choose to develop in your programs and ministries. So my point is, we often just need to be reminded that we have to look at it from a different vantage point to see what might be standing in the way of people's presence and participation. And we're just not good at that. We are filled, all of us, prone to ignorance and prejudice and limited ways of thinking and self-interest. And so it's hard for us to step outside of that and see it from a different lens.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, you talked about the difference too between announcement and invitation,
Yeah.
which it sounds like it dovetails nicely with this. It's announcing that we are welcoming, but actually inviting with an eye towards the other as someone we want to include, and asking, if I'm getting all this right, asking, what is most needed, right? What would actually be helpful, not just what we think might be helpful, but what would actually be helpful.
Yeah, I think we come at this with a lot of presumptions,
Yeah.
and so we just have to be careful about that. And I'm all for declaring our welcome. I just feel our proclamations have to be backed up with our practices. And so, as I shared in the talk, a lot of people have had wounding experiences in the church, and so they're not going to trust that declaration of
Right.
welcome. And so saying, reaching out and saying, we want you to be part of this place. What would it look like to make Sunday night the best day of the week for your son or daughter, or whatever it might be? Those are the kinds of questions where you I think you can think about what are things in general that might be welcoming to people with a variety of disabilities, but ultimately it comes down to what's going to be welcome for Aaron, or John, or whoever it might be. What's that going to look like for you? And then we try to move as best we can in those directions.